Hey everyone, it's Kabir here. So from today we are going to start with CSS. Okay. Now what is CSS and why we need a CSS? That what you have to understand. Now I think while we are doing HTML sessions, you understood why CSS, why we need a CSS, right? And you understood the importance of CSS, and without CSS how your website is going to look like, right? Now CSS is going to stand for cascading style sheet. CSS stands for cascading style sheet. Okay. Now why we have to use CSS? Now if you want to design your website in very beautiful manner, or you want to design your website with the proper alignments, with proper structure, then you go for CSS, right? That is the importance of CSS. Without CSS, you know how your website is going to look like, and with CSS we know how the website is going to look like. So if you want to attract the clients or users towards your website, then you should have very strong CSS in your website. Means you should be applying very strong CSS concepts while designing your website. The CSS is a very crucial part whenever you go for a website designing. Now it might be a HTML, or it might be something like you're going to design a website using Angular. There also you have to use the CSS. Now we have the technology like a Bootstrap, which is a framework of CSS. Now what is framework? What is the difference between Bootstrap and CSS? We are going to see in future sessions. But even though if you are using some Bootstrap, sometimes you get requirement to customize your particular web page where you don't want it to use the Bootstrap. Like for one particular page, you want to customize it. That time you have to go with the CSS. And the most important thing is, if you want to understand the Bootstrap, you should have the knowledge of CSS. For any static website, there are three building blocks to develop any kind of website. The first is HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript. This should be the mandatory knowledge that every developer should have. Though he is the front-end developer, or he is a back-end developer, or he is some database administrator, or he is a full-stack developer, or mean stack developer, or mun stack developer, whatever he might be, he should have the knowledge on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let's start. Now we understood that CSS stands for cascading style sheets. Now CSS is used to style our website. We know these two things. Now what CSS contains? Now CSS contains properties. How our HTML contains? If someone asks you what HTML contains, it contains all the tags. Now if you want to construct some UI, like you want to construct a paragraph or headings or buttons, so you have a tags for that particular thing. In the same way, now CSS have the collection of properties. Now this properties is divided into key value pair. Means now if you want to define any property, you have to define the property in key value pair. For example, you have a property called background. Now you want to give a background color for your web page. Now for that you have one property in CSS. Using background property, you can give a background color to your web page. Now how that property is going to look like? That property is going to look like a key value pair. So what is the key? For background color, the key is background color. Now next thing is, we should have the value. Value means which color you want it to give. And how can you separate a key and a value? Using a colon. And you have to give the value. Now value might be anything. It might be orange, red, whatever color you want it to give. And one thing you have to understand, the key is permanent. We have to use as it is. How they have provided the key, in the same way we have to use. Whereas your value is not permanent. You can give any kind of value. You can change it. Like first time you can give green, then orange, red, then some blue violet, then some pink color, whatever you required. Okay. So what CSS contains? It contains the properties, and each property will be the key value format, where key is your fixed fixed thing. You have to use as it is. Like here, background hyphen color. So you have to use as it is. If you miss any one, like if you miss hyphen, then it is not going to apply to your website. So we have to be very strict towards it. We have to use as it is. Now value depends upon our requirement. Now someone might require green color, someone might require blue color, someone might require red color. So it is changeable, whereas keys are not changeable. These are very basic things, and you have to be very strict towards it. Okay, you have to be very sharp. So this is all about your CSS. So we are going to understand each and every property in depth, so that you can analyze, okay, for this requirement, what should be my styling. So this is how you have to learn. So we will be going the step by step. Now let us understand what is the syntax of CSS. Now if you want to define some syntax, means what is the syntax of CSS. Now what is syntax? Now basically the people who are very beginner, they get confused. What is the syntax? Why we have to follow syntax, right? Even when I was like a beginner, when I started the coding, that time I used to confuse a lot. What is the syntax? What is the meaning of syntax? Normally the syntax is nothing but your grammar. Now whenever you wanted to learn English language, you have to follow the grammars, right? Why we have to follow grammar? Now if you want to use some proper sentence, or if you want to convey some information to some other person, you have to convey him in a proper way. Now if you want to convey some information in a proper way, then you have to follow a one strategy. You have to follow one format, and that format is grammar, right? In the same way, whenever you are writing some programming languages, or you are writing some CSS properties, now this property should understandable by the browser. Now browser should understand it. So we have to give the instruction to the browser according to the browser understandable format, right? So that format, that way of giving the instructions are called your syntax. Now what is the syntax of CSS? The syntax of CSS is very easy. Now first you have to write the selector. Selector means for which particular element you wanted to give some stylings. That particular element you have to identify. So that identification is called your selector. Then now once you have identified, okay, for this particular element I wanted to use some color. Now how can you apply the color? How can you apply the properties? Then that property should be inside your curly braces. Now this is the open curly brace, and this will be your close curly brace. Now whatever property you wanted to write, you should write inside this particular brackets only. Now property will be in key value pair. For example, background color. So how can I write background color? Background color. Now this is your key. Now how can you divide your key and value? Using colon, and you have to give the value of the column. For example, green. Okay, this is what called one property. Now if you want to give multiple properties, then how can you differentiate one property to the another property? Using semicolon. You have to give the semicolon. If your browser is going to find a semicolon, then it means browser will understand, okay, now one property has finished, now I have to understand the next property. So how to give the next property? For example, padding. So the key is padding. Okay, padding. Now how can you differentiate a key and value? Using colon, and you have to give some value like 10 pixel. Okay, now one more property you wanted to give. So you have to first give the semicolon, means you are telling, okay, this property has ended, now I am starting a new property. So now here you can give something like margin, something like 20 pixel. Now this is how what you have to understand. So what you guys understood is right here, syntax. Okay, now the syntax should be, first should be selector. Selector means on which element you wanted to styling. Now every property should be inside your curly braces. Now each property will be in the pair of key value pair, right? Now how can you differentiate a key and value? Using a colon. And how can you differentiate one property to the another property? Using a semicolon. So that is the syntax we have to follow. Now what you are going to learn in the CSS, you are going to learn multiple properties. Now you have to understand each and every property in depth. So what this property is going to do, what is the key of this property, and what is the values of these properties, like that. That's thing we are going to learn in the CSS. Now let's come to our VS Code. Now you understood what are properties. Now you understood how to give the syntax. Cool. Now what are selectors? Now you understood what are selectors as well, right? For which a particular element you wanted to give, that element you have to identify, and that identification is called selectors. Now how can you identify one element? You can identify the one element in many ways. The first way is called using the tag name. Using a tag name you can identify one element. Second is called, now second, by second approach also you can identify an element, but that approach is called ID. Now using the some ID of that tag also you can identify the particular tag. Now third, you can identify using class, right? Now using fourth, you can identify using some attributes. Now this is called tag selector, this is called ID selector, this is called class selector, and this is called attribute selector. And one more thing we have known as pseudo selector. Now pseudo selector we will be seeing, which is a very special selector and it's important as well. Okay, now as of now we are going to understand about selectors. What is tag name, ID, class, attribute? This is the thing. But before understanding this particular selectors, first of all we have to understand in how many ways we can link our CSS to HTML. This is the main thing. In how many ways we can write our CSS code, or in how many ways you can link your CSS to a HTML. There are three ways. The first way is called inline. It's called inline styling. Now second is called internal styling. And third one is called external styling. So we will be going step by step. Each step you should understand, so that every step you should be linked, then you will get the actual concept. Now here we are focusing how can we link our CSS to HTML. So for that, let's create one file. So I'm gonna create like h1, sorry, it's a 001 and CSS, and I'm gonna say first something like .html. Okay, now we created one HTML file. So how can we get the skeleton of HTML? Doc tab. Now we got our HTML skeleton. Now here I'm writing something like heading, like h2. I'm saying it's a CSS. Now after that I'm gonna say p lorem something like 10 tab. In the same way I wanna say one more p lorem 10 tab. In the same way I want more two paragraphs, so I'm just gonna copy it, come and you paste here. So now you are able to see some h2 heading and some paragraphs. So just save it and it comes to your default browser. Now you are able to see some stuff on your web page, right? Now let us understand. The first is what is inline styling. Okay, now inline styling is nothing but you are going to give the style to your HTML element using a attribute, and that attribute is called style. Means you are going to give styling to this tag using a attribute called style. Okay, now what you wanted to give, one background color. So background color, and what value you want to give, you wanted to give something like blue violet. Now you are going to save it. Now come here to your browser and refresh. Now this particular way of styling is called inline styling, means you are giving the styling to a particular element using an attribute called style. Okay, now suppose you wanted to give one more style like padding. Padding equals to 20 pixel. Save it and comes to your browser and refresh. Now you are able to give some padding as well. Now just see, from one property to the another property you are dividing with the semicolon. Okay, you have understood it. Now when we have to go for inline styling, suppose you wanted to give a specific color, a specific styling, or a specific collection of some properties to only one element in that particular document. Just consider here we have like 10 h2 tags, but we want to give a styling for only this h2 tag. We don't want it to give the styling to another, and this stylings for this h2 tag should be very specific. Then we go for the inline styling. And one more limitation, like you have to understand, if you want to give very less properties, like here we give two properties, for example you wanted to give only 3 or 4 properties, then go for inline stylings. Right, now just consider for this h2 you wanted to provide some 15 properties, then it's not advisable to go with inline stylings. Why? Because it will make your this particular code very complex. See, now here we wrote 2. Now just consider if we write here 15 properties, how long it will be and how complex it will be. In the same way, if you have 100 tags, now for 100 tags you are going with the inline styling, and each tag contains some 20 to 25 properties. Now just consider how complex your code is going to be. So to overcome this particular scenario or this particular problem, we will go for internal styling, means that's the second one. We'll go for internal styling. Now what is internal styling? In internal styling, you are going to write all css code in one tag, and that tag is called your style tag, and that style tag should be present in your header tag. Now let's come to our head, and here we have to write a tag called style. Okay, now we wrote the style tag. Now you wanted to provide some colors to this p tag. So first you have to write a selector. Selector means for which element you wanted to use. So for that we have a selector called tag selector. So we are writing p. I want to use some stylings to p tag. Okay, now we have to write all the properties inside a bracket, curly brackets. Now here I wanted to write something like background color. Okay, I wrote background color something like brown. Then I want to write one more property. For example, it should be color. Color should be white. Okay, we wrote one more. Now I want to write one more like padding. Okay, we wrote the padding as well. Something like 10 pixel. And one more property I want to write like box shadow. Okay, the box shadow should be something like 0 0. We are going to understand about box shadow in future sessions in deep, what you mean by first 0, what is the second 0, something like that. Okay, now 10 pixels, something like black. Now save it. Now using your internal styling, you can write much properties, like you can write some 15 properties. Now it is little bit better compared to your inline styling. So you go for inline styling on two specific scenarios. The first scenario, you want to use some styling to that particular specific tag, only that one tag in your document. Okay, this is the first condition. Second condition, you don't want it to give multiple properties. You want it to give 3 or 4 or 5, maximum 5 properties you want it to go. Then go for the inline styling. Now you get the requirement something like you wanted to give a styling for a particular tag like h2 tag. Then this is the first requirement. The second requirement is for this h2 tag you wanted to give something like 25 properties. Then go for internal styling. Okay, now just save it, comes to your browser and refresh it. Now you are able to see some stylings to your p paragraph. Okay, now the problem you are able to see, you are getting the same styling for all the p properties, right? You are getting all the same properties because we have used directly a p tag. Now sometimes you get a requirement where you have to give a specific property for this p and one more specific properties for this p. Now here we have the background color brown. Now you wanted to give background color as a green for this paragraph, and for this paragraph you wanted to give for yellow. You wanted to give background color for this paragraph as something like black. Then for that we have to select some other selectors. So we will be seeing after few minutes how can we do that. Now as of now you have understood what is the difference between your inline styling and your internal styling. Now the third approach is called external styling. Now what is external styling? In external styling you are going to create one more file, like you have here 01 css dot first html. You will create one more file like 01 css first. Now here extension should be dot, not html, it should be dot css. Now whenever you are going to use the extension dot css, it means it is a separate file and which contains the css code. Now enter. Now you have created a file called dot css. Now here you wanted to apply a colors. To for whom you wanted to apply colors? You wanted to apply colors for h2, you wanted to apply colors for p. Then let's come to our css file and just say h2. Okay, now what colors you wanted to apply? Just consider you wanted to apply background color should be something like blue. Okay, you wanted to apply padding as well, 10 pixel. Then you wanted to apply box shadow, something like 20 pixel, and it should be something like pink. Just consider. Okay, now save it. Now you wanted to apply some colors for your p also. So what you are going to do, you are going to write that all properties for p also here. Just write p and just will copy these properties. And here we are going to change the color from blue to orange. Okay, and here let's make it as a black. Now save it. Now you wrote all the properties in separate file called css file. Now just remove this all the CS stylings. So we don't have any stylings and we don't have here any stylings. Okay, now when you are going to save and comes to your browser, now you are able to see no stylings applied for this particular web document. Now what you wanted to apply some stylings to this particular web page. So for that you wrote you created a file called css and you wrote all the stylings here, but these stylings are not applicable for this html. Why? Because this html don't know what styles to be applied, so we have to link this css file to this html file. So for that we have a separate tag called link tag, and this is a self-closing tag. Means it will not have opening and closing tag, it will have only one tag, and this particular format is called self-closing tag. Now this tag is going to take some attributes. The first attribute is called relation. So what is the relation? It's a style sheet. We are going to say it is going to contain one document which is a style sheet kind of document. Now it will contain one more attribute called href. Now in this href you have to give the location of your css file. So where your css file is present, which is present in the same folder, and the file name is 01 css. Now you are saying that I wanted to apply stylings to this particular tags, and that stylings are present in this file. Now save it, comes to your browser, refresh it. Now you are able to see the styling. So what is the benefit of going to your external file? Now you are completely separated your css code in separate file. Now your file is going to look very clean. Now if suppose for example if you get some errors, it is very easy to find your error or find your mistakes. Okay, now your maintainable will be very easy because you are writing all the css code in here in css. Now for example, by mistake instead of p you wrote double p and you have saved it and you came to your browser and you refreshed. Now that stylings are not applicable in your document because you wrote some wrong css code. Now you will come to your code now html and you will see did you wrote anything wrong. You will not find because there are very less code and it is very clean, so it is very easy for you to find your error. Now you will come to your css and you will see what is the mistake, then you will find okay this is the mistake. So you are going to write P and you are going to save it. Now just consider if you wrote this 2, you are going to write a style tag and you are going to write. Now as of now it is very small file, very less code, it is very easy. Just consider if you have 1000 properties and you have 1000 code and you are going to write in only one file, how complex it will be. And you have just missed only one P, you have added only one P for your CSS, then you have to search and you have to see each and every property, each and every tag, how much time it is going to go to search your error. And we don't have any facility in your like HTML to find your error. So that's the big difference when you go for your internal styling or inline styling. So always in your real time also everybody will follow the external stylings. They are going to write a separate file for your css code and you have to follow this. So from now you have to follow this style. Now you have to understand when you have to go for inline styling, when you have to go for internal styling, and when you have to go for external styling. If you want to give a particular styling for a one element in your document, and that also it contains very less properties like 3 to 5 properties, then go for your inline styling. Done. Now when you go for internal styling, now suppose you wanted to give some 15 to 20 properties, then go for internal styling. Now suppose you contain some 1000 to 2000 properties for your document or for entire your website, then go for your external stylings. Mainly in your real time they will go for external stylings, and depending upon requirements we have to go for inline stylings and for the external stylings. Now inline stylings can be done using an attribute called style. Internal stylings can be done using a tag called style. Now external stylings is nothing but a different file. So you have to link this file to your HTML. So how can link? So for that you have an attribute called link. For that you have a tag called link, and this tag is going to take two attributes. One is href. In href you have to say the location of your CSS file, and one is real. It's nothing but relationship. So that's the benefit. Now one more benefit you have for external styling. Now this is one HTML document. Just consider like this, we have the 5 HTML documents. Okay, 5 HTML documents like 1, 2, 3. Now for that 5 HTML documents you wanted to give same stylings, and you have something like 1000 properties. Now just consider if you write that 1000 properties for each and every tag using a style attribute, how complex it will be. The first thing. Now just consider if you go for internal styling, then in each and every file you have to write that 1000 properties. Means there is a duplication of your code. Unnecessarily you are writing the same code for many times. Means you are writing 5000 properties. Now in this case if you go for external, you are going to write only 1000 times, and in this page you are going to link with all your HTML using only one tag called link tag. Now this is the benefit that you are going to get using external styling. So this is the basic question everybody will ask: what is the difference between inline styling, what is the difference between your internal styling, what is the difference between your external styling, and when we have to go for inline, when we have to go for internal, when we have to go for external. This totally depends upon your requirement. never you should say that inline is not important, internal is not important, or external is not important. Everything is important. It's only depends upon your requirement. Now, for example, you required only a small stylings for h2. Now, for that, if you are creating a separate file and you are linking that file, how much waste of time you are doing? You have to create a file, you have to link it. So there your external styling is going to fail for that requirement. So for that requirement, inline styling is the best approach. Now, if you have some 15 properties, then again you are creating a separate file, and for only one element you require that styling. And why you have to create the separate style, and I mean separate file and separate code for that? For that you can go for internal styling. So for this particular requirement, internal styling is going to suit. Okay, so like this, you have to identify for your requirement which styling should be used, which will be the appropriate. So according to that, you have to go. Now this is all about your stylings. Okay, inline styling, internal styling, and external styling. Now what are selectors? Now first is, what is tag selector? Now let comes to our HTML. Let's remove it. Okay, now first thing is tag selector. Means selector identifies for which particular element you need styling. So I'm saying like I want styling for the P. So you have to write P, means the tag name, and this particular selector is called tag selector. Now whenever I'm going to write a tag selector P, so I'm going to copy here, I'm coming here and I'm pasting, and I'm going to just refresh it. Now comes to your browser. I think you have to write it in the style tag, right? So write a style tag. Inside style tag, we have to write all these properties. Save it, comes to your browser and refresh it. Now you are able to see all the stylings are applied for your paragraph. Now you get a requirement where you have to give a separate styling for a separate paragraph. Now that time you should not go for tag selector. You have to go for tag selector when you wanted to use same styling for all the paragraphs tags. In that scenario, you go for tag selector. Now in this selector, you have to give a ID. So I'm giving ID equals to P1. And for this paragraph, I'm giving the ID equals to P2. Now you wanted to apply a separate set of properties for this paragraph, and you wanted to apply a separate set of properties for this paragraph. Then for that, we need to change the selector from tag selector to ID selector. Now how can you represent an ID selector? Using called hash. First you have to write hash, then you have to write the ID name. So what is the ID name? It's a P1. Okay, now you wanted to write stylings for P2 as well. So what you have to do, just copy this particular thing, paste, and now here you have to give the ID as a P2, and here I'm going to change the color to red, and I'm adding a extra property called color should be white. Now, and this is the semicolon, save it. Now what we are telling, for the ID, I mean for the element whose ID is P1, apply this set of properties, and the element whose ID is P2, apply this particular set of properties. Now just save it, comes to your browser, refresh. Now you are able to see this this paragraph have separate properties, this paragraph have separate properties. So when you have to go for ID, when you have a specific requirement, a specific paragraph need a specific set of properties, and this paragraph need different set of properties. In such scenarios, in such requirement, you have to go for the ID. Now suppose you have the 5 paragraphs. Now you want same styling for all that all that paragraph elements. Then it's better to go with your tag selector, and you have to go for ID selector when you have a specific requirement. Now I want this particular paragraph also should be the same color, means it should be the red, and for this particular paragraph should have the same properties which we have for the first paragraph. Then that time you should not go for id, because id represents a specific identification for that particular element. How we have a specific roll number in our engineering or in our school days, for every student the roll number will be unique, right? Names might be duplicate, like there might be two name like there might be two persons who have the same name, but the roll number will not be same. So the roll number is like your id. Now you wanted to apply a same properties. Now one approach is give one more id for this paragraph, like p3 and p4. Now we have to copy the same properties, then again we are doing some duplication here, right? Duplication of code. So instead of that we have one more property called class. Now just give a class equals to p1, and here change from id to class. And now you require same set of properties for this paragraph, and the property should be same as p1. So for this also you should give the property called class, and the value should be same, p1. And for this just say class equals to, so let's make it as a p1 and let's make it as a p2. Now we are saying this paragraph and this paragraph belongs to the same class. Now instead of giving the id, we have to give the class, and this class is called class selector. Now how the id is starting with the hash, the class will start with dot. Now class selector will start with the dot, say it as a dot. Now we are saying this property means apply this property to that element whose class is p1. Now in our body tag we have the elements, we have the two elements whose class is p1, that is this first one, and we have the third one. So apply same stylings for this p1 and for this p. So just save it and comes to your browser, refresh it. Now you are able to see same stylings for this one and same stylings for this one and this one and this one. So this is what the class selectors. Now you have understood what is your tag selector. You know what is id selector. You know what is class selector. And you know when we have to go for class, when we have to go for id, and when we have to go for tag. You should go for the tags if you want to give same stylings for all the p tags in your document. All, if you have the 10, if you want same styling for 10 paragraphs, then go for tag. Now if you have the 10 p tags, now you want to use separate styling for each and every tag, then go for id selector. Now you have some requirement, like you have the 10 tags, but you wanted to give 3 paragraph tags same styling, another 3 same styling, another 4 same styling, then go for your class. Now what is attribute selector and what is pseudo selector, we will be seeing in next session, because now you are not able to understand it. So just as of now you have to concentrate on these 3 selectors, and we will be seeing about these 2 selectors in future sessions. So today you have learned about what is CSS, why we require CSS, what is the syntax of CSS. Now what we are going to learn in CSS, we are going to learn all the properties in CSS. Now what is inline styling, what is internal styling, what is external stylings. Now when it comes to a selector, how many types of selectors we have? We have totally 5 types: tag name, id selector, tag selector, class selector, attribute selector, and pseudo selector. Now in this session we learned just 3 selector: tag, id, class, and you learned in which scenarios, in which requirement you have to go with which approach. So that's the main important thing. For which scenario you have to follow which approach. This is the most important thing as a developer you have to understand. So that's all for this session, guys. Thank you for watching my video, and the people who are new to our channel, just subscribe, like, and share if you find it is very useful, so that people can get help. So that's all, guys. Bye bye.